what is Trump trying to do? Like, there's some people are saying like he is trying to, I don't want to give him too much credit for having a cohesive ideology here.
Yeah.
Because I think like two things can be true at the same time. He is positioning us in such a way that just happens to be lucrative for him and for, like, frankly, Musk, for that matter. And he may have other, but essentially accepting a bipolar or a tripolar or a quadpolar sort of like world where, it's founded on just sort of, we're just going to do business. Like instead of having a mob war, we're just going to carve up the city. And we're each going to get 1/4. And as long as we all stay in our turf, we get to do this stuff. I mean, give me your sense of what's happening with that.
I mean, that's what's happening, but that's in another era, we would have just called that imperialism.
Right.
Straight up. And so, like, Trump is, and again, all of this is like, you don't want to make him seem more coherent than he is, but you also do want to draw attention to the outlines of kind of what's happening, like structurally. So like Trump is still doing China rivalry, but a great power competition. It's not like a grand strategy though, like he's doing a lot of incoherent things. And so big picture, the shape of his foreign policy is totally imperialist and ethno-nationalist, which is to say a more predatory version of the kind of domination that even Biden pursued. And so you look at like, where is Trump doing the imperialisms? It's Greenland, it's Panama Canal, it's the fentanyl wars with Mexico. All of that is justified on the basis of confrontation with China. The land grabs, the need to secure critical minerals, it's all China. Even the Ukraine minerals deal that fell apart last week in that just agonizing embarrassment in the White House, like that could not be further away from China, really. But the reason why the critical minerals, which is why Zelensky got invited there, was a priority in the first place for foreign policy is because this belief that critical minerals is the hotness that you got to secure in the case of war with China. And then Pete Hegseth's war on DEI at the Pentagon, why does that matter to them? Because they say DEI is messing up their lethality. Well, lethality for whom? For a war against China, The $900 billion military budget plus the $1.7 trillion in nuclear modernization over the next 25 years, none of that has any justification except for war with China. Like cartel wars with Mexico don't require stealthy F-22s. They don't require nuclear submarines. That's stuff for China, And then the thing that like people are really missing, this is a big story, the Silicon Valley defense cartel, the Palantir, Anduril, SpaceX, OpenAI, these are like the biggest beneficiaries of the Trump presidency. They all have close ties to Elon Musk. And you look at their annual reports, you look at their quarterly conference calls, they are the hype men for World War III with China. They are selling the China threat to the public as their business model and then telling the US government, pay me because we're your answer to fighting China. So this whole thing is rigged. And this is why it's like Trump says lots of incoherent stuff, like, I'm friends with Xi Jinping. I get along great with China and all this stuff. Love to see it. That's nice, good, peaceful rhetoric. But structurally, all of the material interests that are associated with his presidency, they don't make money except by ringing the China threat alarm. And so
with
the
AI,
Pentagon,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to incorporate that into their Pentagon spending, or at least that's going to be, I think, a part of the defense future, right? Is using American-based artificial intelligence. Like, I mean, we saw it in Gaza. Anthony Lowenstein wrote the book, The Palestine Laboratory, about how weapons are tested on the Palestinian people. I could totally see the AI or like Elon's AI being incorporated into weapons technology with his satellites and things like that.
That's the plan, man. Like they're literally the VCs, the tech VCs. They've put $500 billion. There's no growth sectors in the global economy anymore. We're screwed, right? So they're looking for a unicorn. There isn't one. So what do? They put $500 billion into AI. Oops. AI is not profitable. And depending, like, and ChatGPT is like, you know, 6th grade copying my essay homework or whatever. Like, it's not great most of the time. But even if you think AI is whiz bang technology, they just can't figure out how to make it profitable. Certainly not $500 billion profitable. But do you know how you make profit in a low growth world? You sell to the national security state. You know, the Pentagon isn't going to check your homework about whether they're getting a good deal from their future of war. That's not falsifiable. You know, you say you stick some AI in the algorithm that you sell them and you do cost overruns on, and they'll pay for it and they'll package it and they'll be like, well, it's got AI, so it's super sexy. Plus Israel's using this to kill Palestinians. But it's like, you're really talking about just like automation at a certain point. You know, it's like, and it's like it's going to be profitable for the VCs only by way of selling it to the national security state, which means, again, you have to have like a big bad to hang all this on. And that's mostly China.
So, I mean, it sounds like if I was to make a difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, you know, sort of broadly speaking, they both want to villainize China. All the typical people are going to benefit from that. I mean, we have a $900 billion defense industry. I mean, at least, right? I mean, that's just what we advertise.
Yeah, there's some funny accounting there.
Yes, and but the some segment of the Biden, I guess, administration sold it as like, this is going to help with our manufacturing base, and this is going to help blue collar people, and it's all sorts of other benefits could come from it that we don't know. Maybe we'll get, you know, more civil rights for people, or I don't know what. And then, but the Trump people have the sort of the same dynamic, except for this is going to make all of our crypto buddies and tech bros really, really wealthy. So I mean, my sense is that Musk and some of these people don't have, I mean, I get the sense that Musk is going to sell to both sides. Like, this is sort of like, I get, you know, this is Musk's investment in China. Like, they don't want to destroy China. They just want it to exist as a threatening sort of like almost like catalyst to keep producing this national security need, right? So you have to sort of like, you have to calibrate this on some level. Like, you wouldn't want to defeat them in any meaningful way, because then all of a sudden, well, what are you left with? You'd have to like make space invaders on some level, right? Like, oh, this is the problem. This is why I've been saying we got to go to Mars to fight the people from Venus or whatever it is. Like, so this has to like be maintained as a Cold War rather than a hot war on some level.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, man. That's the beauty of the Cold War to these guys. You get to have the perpetual crisis and the paranoia machine that diverts attention from the actual needs of society. You know, the excuse in real time. Republicans right now, amid the $1 trillion budget, $4.5 trillion of tax cuts, cutting SNAP benefits, cutting Medicaid, all of that going together. You know, like the boogeyman, the foreign policy boogeyman has always been part of that reactionary project, you know, like, and this is we have a whole chapter of this in the book. It's like geopolitical rivalry helps consolidate reactionary political projects at home and abroad. I
mean, this is always the case. I mean, and it's not just with America or with China. I mean, it helps with Iran to maintain their. I went down to Cuba, and there's a statue 500 feet from the U.S. annex of Jose Marti, pointing, saying to America, "Stay away from our children," and he's holding Elian Gonzalez. These guys, incidentally, They did not live at the same era. So the idea is that, this is the way that people foment. I mean, it's probably helping Zelensky to have gone and had this sort of like a problem with Trump. I mean, in terms of like domestically, I mean, this is the way what George Bush did in many respects too. So, yeah. All right. So is there to the extent that, like, I mean, is there a threat from China? Like, what, I mean, I don't even know how to define what that would mean. Like, I imagine a world where there is a threat from a foreign entity. It's hard to imagine one where it's not exaggerated, but like, what is there a threat? And then also, like, just touch on what you think that dynamic is going on with Trump and Zelensky and Russia.
Yeah, so China is not a threat to U.S. existence unless we're going to fight a nuclear war with them. What they threaten is America's dominance. They threaten American primacy. Literally, China's rise comes at the expense of America's status as the dominant power. But
what does that mean to me?
Yeah,
okay, well, that was, I was going to say, like, okay, so I can't.
Normal people don't get anything from
I
that.
was going to say, like, we're not going to be able to go to, like, I don't know, the Olympics hockey game and go, you know, we're number one.
Right.
Okay, or whatever it is. Like, but outside of that, like, how would that impact us on a daily basis? Because it seems to me that if we maintain decent relationships with the world, there's no threat to the U.S. primacy of the dollar, let's say, because there's no reason to change it, right? Like, you know, the inertia in and of itself would just keep us. And I would imagine we would feel it if the U.S. dollar was not the sort of like a primary currency in the world. That would impact us in many ways. If somehow we were not the biggest consumer of goods in the world, even if we were second biggest, I think we would still be okay.
Who cares where we fall on the list of things? What we care about is our lived conditions.
Right. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to come up with a scenario where we would feel a broad-based change in our conditions. And it's really hard to imagine one outside of, like, being radiated by a nuclear bomb.
That's right. That's right. But these guys who make the foreign policy, they're very animated by these, like, old Munich appeasement analogies. And, like, they're trying to play, like, chess 3 moves ahead, where it's like, oh, if in a hypothetical future, China consolidates control of Taiwan, then China will have a greater ability to conquer all of East Asia. And if China conquers all of East Asia, then China will have the ability to project power across the Pacific Ocean and attack California. And it's like, dude, like, what are you talking? That's total galaxy brain stuff. You know, like, that's not the real world at all. And you're going to risk World War III now in the real world to prevent that thing from happening? Also, pay attention to China. Why do you, like, on what grounds China on its own terms? Why would they do that? Why would they want that or need that? You know?
Is that really, do they really believe this stuff? Or is it more like, look, I'm best friends with, my father-in-law runs so-and-so corporation, and they're going to lose their market share if China, do they really believe? Because what they're talking about is the domino theory, right? I mean, it's just in a different name, and it sort of feels like that was disproved.
Yeah, it's not serious analytically, but and for normal people, I think. But there's a little bit of, like, there's true believers, you know, there's the big new Brzezinski guys. They think of the world as a chessboard, literally. Unfortunately, that's the lion's share of people who actually are foreign policy practitioners, you know. And then there are some foreign policy practitioners who get paid from the defense industry or get paid from UAE and Qatar, you know, who get paid by American allies. And so there's a lot of corruption in the system, and you should totally follow the money with this stuff. And ultimately, all of this is happening. Like, if we abandoned primacy, if we didn't relate to the world in a predatory way, we would be a lot better off. We wouldn't have these problems, and China wouldn't appear as nearly as threatening, you know. The Zelensky stuff is pure. I mean, who knows why Trump is infatuated with Putin. Like, I'm not going to psychoanalyze him, but, like, that's what I see is total imperialism. So the template of like great power competition is inter-imperial rivalry. Land grabs of choke points like the Panama Canal, resource extraction from Greenland, that's imperial foreign policy. As you take that template and apply it to Ukraine, you would predict that the US doing an imperial foreign policy is going to seek maximum rent-seeking and resource extraction from Ukraine, screw them and their people. That's how it works, because it's big power, small power. And that's what the minerals deal was, minerals for military assistance, you know? And so it's the drama of the blow up. The one thing Trump said that was true in that room, as awful as it was, is he told Zelensky straight up, he's like, you don't have the cards, man. And that's true. He's losing. Russia can outfight him, last longer. Russia can out-escalate if needed, bigger, badder weapons. And the politics of this, everybody knows Trump is on Russia's side, which is why Ukraine doesn't have the cards, you know? And so we're just seeing that version of imperialist foreign policy play out. The one thing I would note is that like the national security bros that I like from my old world that I kind of pay attention to still, they have two bumper stickers. They consider themselves like never Trump type people for the most part. And yet they're totally willing to serve him and his agenda. And so like, I'm not going to psychoanalyze that, but the two bumper stickers of what they think they're trying to do within Trump world right now is minerals for military assistance, which is a paradigm that they basically support. And that's what's playing out in Ukraine, just in a vulgar way. And then the other one is Monroe Doctrine to the shores of China. Monroe Doctrine, of course, is an imperialist doctrine. It's an exclusionary doctrine of other great powers. If you remember Latin American history, you know, under the Monroe Doctrine, we did dozens of wars, dozens of coups, you know what I mean? In the name of the Monroe Doctrine. If we extend that doctrine truly to the shores of China, it's World War III time. There's just no avoiding it. Like that those bumper stickers are horrific if true, because it's pure imperialism all the way down, all the way till World War III, baby. That's scary.
We should say also the stuff we did in Latin America, we now is driving essentially, I mean, you could argue, put Trump in power, right? I mean, because the catalyst for this anti-immigrant sentiment is driven by what we did in destabilizing this hemisphere in many respects, and making it impossible in many of these countries for civil society to grow and develop and stabilize and develop a mechanism in which to protect and benefit materially its own people. And so people are coming up here to look for work.
Right. And go ahead, Van.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, this is what puts us on the left. Analytically, we look at insecurity in the world and we attend to and we perceive the root causes, which are always social and political, even of military insecurity, you know? And the right does not think that way. They ignore the social and political inequities that lead to the problems in the world, and they focus only on the proximate thing. You know, does the guy have a gun or not? Are they coming across the border or not? Not the why, not the layers that get us down to what caused this situation, you know? That's what makes us the left, man.
But my question then, I guess, is like we focus a lot on our motivations in the West, and particularly the United States. What is China's vision here? Like, they obviously are trying to extend their soft power in a variety of different instances, whether it's like, you know, building stuff in the continent of Africa, or it's getting involved in negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia over the starvation of the people of Yemen and that proxy war there, which they were kind of successful. And that the question is like, what do they see as their end goal here? I'm not naive enough to think that they're acting benevolently, but obviously I would say their strategy is more intelligent than ours.
Yeah, I mean, they want greater status. This is a great power thing. Big powers like more status. They're largely happy with the global order as it has existed, although we are actively deconstructing that. And that's a problem for us and them and everybody. But China is like, they have to basically push out a lot of surplus capital that has accumulated as a result of them being the world's factory. And they're the world's factory, because we wanted them to be. But like we pushed shit over to them to make it and process finished goods and then ship it back to us. We asked them to do that, and so they did it, and they benefited from it, right? And if we didn't benefit from it, we wouldn't have asked them to do it. But anyway, the system on which they became the world's factory relied on basically extreme labor repression and environmental degradation, a lack of environmental regulations. This was basically how they became the sort of low-cost manufacturer, which is why we wanted to have them do manufacturing, right? That was their competitive advantage. So labor repression is built into the export-driven model of economic growth that they have. But because they do labor repression, Chinese workers are very insecure, and they don't consume enough domestically. So all the profits that get hoarded by effectively oligarchs and state-run corporations, the profits that get captured from this system have to go somewhere. And so the most productive place to plow it is in investments abroad. And so this is how we get the slogans like Belt and Road Initiative and stuff like that. Like they're trying to usefully use surplus capital generated by a system of labor repression that is directly embedded in our capitalist system, And
is there investment through, for what they call the Belt and Road Initiative, et cetera, but through in other means in Africa, are they doing that for? Is it imperialism in the way that they're doing it, or just in terms of like it's just another mechanism in which to extract resources and I guess to accelerate their own accumulation of of the wealthy elite from China are practicing imperialism, just a slightly different flavor of it.
Yeah, it's less severe. Imperialism, I think, would be an overstatement. What ends up happening, anywhere where they put money, there's a bunch of studies on this, they adapt their investments to the local conditions. So if they're investing in a place that's a thriving democracy, they conform to local regulations, they play their part, they stay apolitical, et cetera, et cetera. But most of the world is not thriving democracies. So when they put money into a place that's impoverished or kleptocratic or corrupt, their investment tends to inflame those local conditions that are already bad, right? So all of these places, especially in the global south, they need foreign investment. They need it bad. And they would prefer China to the IMF because the IMF is still doing the structural adjustment evils even today in 2025. They're still doing that. And so it's really hard for global south countries to accept IMF loans. China doesn't put those kinds of conditionalities on their loans, but they do expect you to have a kind of comprehensive relationship with them, which means you're not going to be part of like American war plans if you're taking money from China. You're not going to be offering like access to the US Air Force to your bases or whatever if you're also having Chinese investment building those bases or building the cell phone towers that you need for your country. And so the developing world is in this trap where China is the lender of choice, and China itself needs to lend in order to sustain the system that it has as the world's factory where it's capturing surpluses, unless it invests in its own labor, which it hasn't really done, And we look at that and we find that threatening. And so we have been putting, in the name of like primacy and great power competition, we put a choice on countries like Fiji or whatever, countries in Pacific and Africa and East Asia. We say, look, don't let Huawei build your cell phone towers. Yes, they're super cheap. And yes, you need super cheap digital infrastructure, but and no, we're not offering an alternative, but don't take it, because if you do, then we're not going to give you USAID money or what, which now, of course, we're not going to do that either. But like, that's the kind of trap that the developing world is in with great power rivalry. It makes them have to choose between China as lender or America as the contingent provider of like assistance, and so governments are trapped in this choice, and it's a choice of our making in a way. And it's not to give China a pass on any of this stuff. Like, the exploitation that sustains this system is bad. The solution is to put more money in the pockets of Chinese workers. The trouble and the reason why the CCP won't do that is because it's not clear that they would still be the world's factory if costs went up that much,
right.
If wages went up that much.
They have to suppress labor on some level to make it worthwhile for companies over here to send their factories to China and around the world. Nice world you got there. Really appreciate it, Van.
Thanks.
Van Jackson, the book is the Rivalry Peril, How Great Power Competition Threatens Peace and Weakens Democracy, co-authored with Michael Brenes. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And we will put a link to that book. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.